In just 2 days, a single spark turned a bustling city into a smoldering ruin, leaving 100,000 homeless and igniting a revolution in firefighting. The Great Chicago Fire, which raged from October 8th to October 10th, 1871, had epic proportions, but its origins can be traced back to a perfect storm of human error and environmental conditions. The summer of 1871 had baked the Midwest in a relentless heat wave. Rainfall was scarce, transforming the landscape into a tinderbox. Fields were dry, and wooden structures dominated the city. Chicago, a booming metropolis of 300,000, was a pulse of industry and innovation, but also a crucible of negligence. The tinder was ready. All it took was one small spark. That spark ignited on a calm October evening. On the night of October 8th, a barn owned by the O'Leary family caught fire. The exact circumstances remain uncertain. Was it a cow kicking over a lantern, or perhaps a careless stable hand? Speculation runs rampant, but definitive answers remain elusive. What's clear is this: when that first flame flickered to life, it found a city unprepared for the inferno that would follow. Chicago's architecture had grown rapidly, fueled by wooden structures built close together. The city, once known for its cautious urban planning, became a labyrinth of highly flammable buildings. Within minutes, the wind picked up, howling through the streets. It carried embers from the O'Leary barn and set the nearby neighborhoods ablaze. Fire swept through the dry frame houses, igniting a chain reaction that engulfed blocks of the city. The tragedy was not solely a result of nature and misfortune. As the fire roared onward, it revealed a staggering inadequacy in firefighting resources. Despite having a volunteer fire brigade and some rudimentary equipment, city officials could do little in the face of such a catastrophe. The water supply was insufficient, and the city's firehouses were poorly equipped and spread too thin. When the alarm sounded, firefighters faced an impossible task. They scrambled to defend homes, but the flames often consumed everything in sight before they could make an impact. As this disaster escalated, reports began to surface about the struggles faced by firefighters as they attempted to dampen the flames. Many were seen valiantly trying to contain the blaze, but without enough manpower and functional equipment, their efforts were in vain. The chaos unfolded under the hostile winds, which fanned the flames, and soon even entire neighborhoods were engulfed in an orange glow that turned the night into day. Citizens fled, their lives turned to ash in mere hours. Amidst the pandemonium, accusations began to swirl. Blame was cast towards immigrants, particularly the Irish and the Irish-born O'Leary family, which mistakenly stoked the flames of public discontent. Misguided rumors fed a narrative that shrouded the tragedy in ignorance and scapegoating. Yet behind this spectacle of human failure lay a pressing realization: the future of urban firefighting had to change. Amid the devastation, a question loomed in the air. Could this disaster lead to vital reforms, or would the city remain marred by its own complacency? The answer would surprise everyone and would alter the fabric of firefighting forever. Flames erupted on the night of October 8th, 1871, igniting a firestorm that would consume over 3 square miles of Chicago. The city's wooden structures, built close together and ripe for disaster, fueled the blaze. Once the fire took hold, it swept through neighborhoods with vicious speed, engulfing thousands of buildings. In just 48 hours, the relentless inferno transformed a vibrant metropolis into a smoldering wasteland. Entire blocks vanished. The flames devoured homes, businesses, and essential infrastructures, leaving nothing but ash in their wake. Among the casualties, the Grand Courthouse, a symbol of justice and order, stood helpless against the conflagration, turning to embers as desperate citizens watched. As panic spread, so did the realization: roughly 100,000 residents were now homeless. The city had turned into a chaotic refuge, with families fleeing for their lives, clutching whatever possessions they could carry. Makeshift shelters sprang up, filled to the brim with survivors who had lost everything overnight. The sky became choked with smoke, and the air hung heavy with the desperation of those trying to find safety. In this chaos, the local churches, which had once stood as sanctuaries of hope and community, also fell victim to the relentless flames. The destruction was not just of buildings, but of a way of life. Chicago, known for its bustling markets and cultural dynamism, found itself reduced to a haunting landscape of destruction. Tragedy struck even deeper. An estimated 300 lives were lost, while countless others suffered injuries that would plague them for years. Survivors emerged traumatized, marked by the horrors they had witnessed. The fire not only ravaged the physical space of the city, but also shattered the very spirit of its people. In the wake of the fire, blame shifted like a gust of wind. Many pointed fingers at immigrants, scapegoating these communities for the city's failures. The truth was far more complex. The conflagration revealed deep-rooted deficiencies in Chicago's firefighting readiness. The existing firefighting infrastructure was antiquated and insufficient, a stark reality that became painfully evident as flames raged unchecked. With reports of firefighters scrambling to contain the blaze, but ultimately failing due to a shortage of water and manpower, calls for reform intensified. In the days that followed, the survivors contemplated their reality. They faced not only the loss of their homes and possessions, but also the stark revelation of how fragile the systems were that they relied upon. This tragedy illuminated the weaknesses in urban planning and public safety that had been ignored for too long. The disaster paved the way for major reforms in firefighting and urban planning. But the question lingered: what would it take for the city to rise from its own ashes? As the dust began to settle, could the people of Chicago harness their grief and determination to create a safer, more resilient city, one that would prevent such a catastrophe from ever happening again? Stay tuned as we explore the pivotal changes that unfolded in the aftermath of the Great Chicago Fire. The Great Chicago Fire didn't just expose the city's vulnerability to catastrophic flames, it laid bare the rampant human failures that allowed such a disaster to unfold. As the fire raged on, a painful truth emerged. Rapid urbanization had created a perfect storm of negligence and greed. In the decades leading up to 1871, Chicago transformed from a nascent settlement into a booming metropolis, its skyline quickly filling with wooden structures. A lack of stringent building regulations meant that many homes and businesses were made of highly flammable materials. These shoddy constructions were no match for the raging inferno that swept through the city. As flames devoured everything in their path, the glaring inadequacies of fire safety measures became tragically evident. Amid the chaos, some saw opportunity rather than disaster. Insurance fraud thrived in the wake of the fire as wealthy merchants, desperate to salvage their fortunes, engaged in deception. They intentionally set their establishments ablaze or exaggerated damages, hoping to cash in on hefty insurance payouts. This betrayal of trust further convoluted an already tragic event, turning a catastrophe meant for rebuilding into a playground for avarice. The local fire department, already undermanned and underfunded before the inferno, faced insurmountable challenges when the flames took hold. Lacking proper equipment, firefighters were equipped only with hand-drawn water pumps and buckets, tools that were laughably inadequate against a wall of fire that consumed hundreds of structures an hour. The city's fire companies were largely volunteer, and many were poorly organized. When the alarm rang out, chaos often ensued. Responding units arrived scattered and under-equipped, if they arrived at all. As panic spread among residents, firefighters found themselves battling not just the cruel elements, but also the bureaucratic failures that had left them vulnerable. Local officials had neglected calls for improved funding and resources for years, prioritizing other expenses over essential public safety measures. The fire exposed this negligence, prompting questions. How did city leaders allow such a breakdown in safety standards? Who would be held accountable for the desperation sweeping through Chicago's streets? The aftermath forced a reckoning. In its wake, the city faced a moral dilemma as residents dealt with the suffering of the homeless, many of whom had lost everything in a single, relentless night. Relief efforts were started, but with palpable urgency came frustration over the lack of a coordinated response before the disaster struck. Survivors wondered why, with all the warnings and the rampant building of flimsy structures, essential reforms had fallen on deaf ears. Yet, those fiery nights were not just about destruction. They were also about a city awakening to its vulnerabilities. Leaders began recognizing that the tragedies of October 1871 could not continue without significant changes to their approach to public safety. The fire demanded a new era of firefighting, a moment ripe for reform, one that would alter the landscape of urban firefighting forever. But would these changes arrive too late for the city of Chicago? As the ash settled and the embers cooled, a new question loomed. Could the resilience of its people overcome the greed that had compromised their safety? The ruins of Chicago smoldered, a testament to chaos and negligence. The Great Chicago Fire left an indelible mark on the city and spurred an urgent need for reform. In its wake, city leaders and citizens faced a grim reality. They could no longer ignore the glaring deficiencies in their firefighting systems. In the aftermath, Chicago swiftly implemented stricter building codes. Gone were the days of wooden structures crammed into tight spaces. New regulations mandated fireproof materials, creating a safer urban environment. Walls of brick and stone replaced flammable timber. Architects now had to consider fire risks when designing buildings, transforming the skyline of Chicago forever. But it wasn't just about materials. The fire revealed a staggering truth. Firefighting had to undergo a radical transformation. The city quickly prioritized establishing municipal fire departments. No longer would volunteers rush to extinguish blazes with limited training and outdated equipment. Chicago demanded a professional approach. Cities across the nation took notice, realizing their volunteer systems could crumble under a similar catastrophe. As the demand for efficiency grew, innovations surged forward. Steam-powered fire engines rolled into service. These machines transformed the speed of response times from minutes to seconds. Just imagine, no more hand-pumped engines, no more reliance on horse-drawn carts racing through the streets. Firefighters could now unleash torrents of water upon flames with unprecedented power. This advancement initiated a revolution in urban firefighting. The innovations didn't just end in Chicago. Every major city began to reevaluate its fire safety protocols. Fire hydrants were installed, fire escapes emerged from buildings, community fire drills became the norm. Awareness of fire hazards permeated society. Gone were the complacent days of negligence. A new era of vigilance began. But while progress marched forward, old habits lingered. Insurance fraud didn't vanish after the flames were extinguished. Many continued to exploit the broken system, seeking to profit from their losses. This added another layer of complexity to recovery efforts, undermining the very reforms meant to protect against such calamities. The 1871 fire was a crucible, a harsh reminder of human greed and the consequences of oversight. The flames had devoured not just buildings, but also the trust of the populace. With each new structure that rose from the ashes, there was a collective hope for a safer future. However, the question lingered: would the reforms endure? As cities enacted new regulations and invested in advancements, they faced another daunting challenge: public compliance. Would the positive changes take root, or would greed find a way to corrupt this newfound order? With urban centers vulnerable to disaster, the real test lay ahead. The Great Chicago Fire had sparked a change, but the revolutionary fight for fire safety was far from over. How would the lessons learned transform the landscape of American cities for generations to come? And who would rise to meet the growing risks of urbanization?